Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we are going to build a mental framework to really understand the invisible forces that shape our societies. We're unpacking the complex, and honestly, sometimes totally surprising links between political systems, the actual capacity of a state, and true economic success. My goal here is to break down these massive, global concepts so you can see exactly how the machinery of the modern world operates behind the scenes. All right, let's quickly run through our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. Law, policy, and governance. 2. The realities of democracy. 3. Understanding state capacity. 4. Measuring true development. And finally, 5. Democracy, autocracy, and development. Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, Law, Policy, and Governance, setting the foundational rules. To really understand how our world is run, we've got to get our terms straight first. People throw these words around all the time, but the crucial point here is separating the strict legal force of government from the much wider collaborative ecosystem of governance. So a government is the formal apparatus of society, right? It can lawfully impose its will and literally use coercive force to make sure people comply. But governance? That's a different beast entirely. It includes the state, sure, but it transcends it. Think of governance as everything from your local neighborhood watch program to massive international trade agreements. It's a whole network of the private sector, nonprofits, and everyday citizens just working things out. And globally, we are seeing a massive shift right now, moving away from relying solely on the government and really embracing this wider net of governance.
Moving right along to Section 2, the realities of democracy, how we rule and are ruled. Let's dig into the most popular form of governance in the modern world.
Now, what's super fascinating here is how the sheer scale of modern society basically forced an evolution. Back in ancient times, some societies practiced direct democracy. Citizens personally showed up and participated in making the decisions that affected their everyday lives. It was very hands-on. But as populations absolutely exploded, well, that just wasn't going to work anymore. It wasn't feasible. So we evolved into representative democracy. We essentially delegate this massive, full-time job of governing to elected officials, and they are meant to make those decisions on our behalf.
And globally, representative democracy is the absolute heavyweight champion of political systems. Today, at least on paper, 58% of the world's population lives across 119 representative democracies. But, and this is a big but, representation is a necessary condition for a democracy, sure, but it isn't always sufficient. Just because a leader gets elected doesn't automatically mean the system is functioning perfectly, or that all voices are actually being heard.
This actually brings up a really fascinating tension between democratic choice and expert knowledge. The ancient philosopher Plato used this great ship analogy. He said, you want a skilled navigator, an expert at the helm of a ship, right? But the passengers, the actual citizens, they have to be the ones who decide the destination. Churchill completely hit the nail on the head when he said experts should be on tap, not on top. Technocrats and specialists are absolutely essential for navigating complex policies, but the democratic passengers must remain sovereign. The experts serve the will of the people, never the other way around. All right, let's pivot to Section 3, Understanding State Capacity, the engine of the state.
Regardless of whether a state is a booming, vibrant democracy or a really strict autocracy, it has to have the actual physical machinery to get stuff done. You can have the most brilliant policies in the world, but without an engine, the car simply doesn't move. That is state capacity, and it builds in 3 core steps. First up is extractive capacity. Basically, a state must be able to collect taxes and revenue, otherwise it can't pay for anything. Second is coercive capacity. It has to maintain its borders and enforce internal order, because without basic safety, literally no other policy matters. And only once a state can extract resources and secure order can it achieve the third step, administrative capacity. This is the ability to actually deliver public goods. We're talking schools, roads, healthcare, efficiently to the public. You absolutely cannot have step 3 without nailing steps 1 and 2 first.
So how do we actually grade a state on all this? Well, for decades, international agencies pushed this really ambitious concept called good governance. It started out small, but quickly bloated into this massive, impossible 116-point wish list of perfect institutional practices. It was incredibly overwhelming for developing nations. So we really need to contrast that fantasy checklist with the pragmatic reality of good enough governance, which is an idea championed by scholar Marilee Grundle. Her approach asks a much more realistic question. What is the absolute minimal acceptable level of governance we need to simply allow poverty reduction and development to happen? It's all about targeting the critical bottlenecks rather than demanding overnight perfection.
Which leads us nicely into Section 4, measuring true development, beyond just money.
Once a state actually has capacity, how are we measuring its success? Honestly, for a really long time, we were staring at the completely wrong dashboard. Our understanding of progress has evolved so much over the years. Back in 1937, Simon Kuznets helped formalize gross domestic product, or GDP. But that was just a measure of raw economic output. By 1990, economists Amartya Sen and Mahbub ul Haq realized that, hey, money alone doesn't equal a good life. So they created the Human Development Index to measure life expectancy, education, and living standards. And jumping to today, we are looking toward the 2050 Sustainable Development Goals, finally realizing that true progress absolutely has to account for planetary survival and zero carbon emissions.
To put the flaw of just using GDP into perspective, think about this staggering number. $2.2 trillion. In 2020, global GDP grew by that massive amount, largely fueled by global military spending. Pumping out all those weapons boosted the global economy on paper. Meanwhile, a mere $50 billion, which is a drop in the bucket compared to $2.2 trillion, needed to vaccinate the entire globe against a deadly pandemic, totally unmet. When we only count market transactions, a destructive war literally looks like economic progress. Crazy, right? Oscar Wilde completely nailed the danger of this modern economic obsession when he said, "The cynic knows the price of everything and the value of nothing." We've kind of squashed incredibly complex things like human health, ecological sustainability, and community well-being down to a single narrow dimension of market price. True development requires us to rediscover value outside of price tags. We have to start valuing a forest for its biodiversity and carbon absorption, for example, and not just look at it as timber waiting to be sold.
And that brings us to the grand finale, Section 5, Democracy, Autocracy, and Development. The ultimate test. Now we're going to see how different political systems actually perform when they're tasked with delivering this complex, multifaceted development to their people. So here's a profound, almost counterintuitive mystery for you. In theory, in a democracy where poor folks significantly outnumber the rich, they should just vote in leaders who will implement long-term poverty eradication, right? Yet many stable democracies in the developing world still suffer from massive poverty. Why is that? Well, because a short-term direct handout, like offering a subsidy right before an election, is an incredibly effective way to win votes. Long-term, indirect market methods, like building complex infrastructure or trade capabilities, take decades to show results. A politician facing a tough election next month simply cannot afford to wait that long.
Let's look at two massive, real-world examples to neutrally evaluate how different structures tackle this. Take India. It has robust democratic institutions and free elections. Yet development scholars note it sometimes acts as a flailing state because it gets hampered by those short-term electoral freebies and local elite capture, which really slows down widespread structural development. On the flip side, you have China. It lacks national democratic elections and operates strictly under an autocratic party system. Yet it managed to lift 850 million people out of poverty through what researchers call adaptive governance. The central government sets very strict top-down directives, but then allows for radical, bottom-up local improvisation to actually solve economic problems on the ground.
Now, seeing the rapid economic gains of an autocracy might make you question the whole democratic experiment entirely. But Nobel laureate Amartya Sen drops a crucial reminder here. He argues we shouldn't wait for a country to be ready or perfectly developed before allowing democracy. A country doesn't have to be deemed fit for democracy. It becomes fit through democracy. The system itself, even with all its messy, slow, short-term flaws, is the very mechanism needed to build a capable, transparent, and fundamentally free society over time. Plus, democracies generally manage to avoid the catastrophic massive upheavals and famines that are historically associated with huge top-down autocratic errors.
But, the very ground beneath how we are governed is shifting right now in the digital age. I want to leave you with this final, really provocative thought from political theorist John Keane. He warns of a new despotism driven by social media and endless communicative abundance. He suggests that today, rulers don't even need raw force to suppress liberties anymore. They can just use algorithms, endless entertainment, and noise to create confusion and voluntary servitude. He says, people don't lose their liberties, they win their enslavement. As our governance systems continue to evolve, we really have to ask ourselves, are we using our technological tools to better participate in our democracy, or are we actively and willingly choosing the very tools that dismantle our own freedoms? It's a heavy question for sure, but one we definitely need to be asking.
Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.